Hello and good morning. Welcome to the latest edition of the Iceni vlog, When Tomorrow Comes. Today we are going to be talking about Glasgow welcoming the world to COP26, which is basically the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of Parties, which runs in Glasgow from the 31st of October to the 12th of November. And it's billed as a crucial moment in the fight against global warming and climate change. And today we're very lucky to have a great panel of guests to discuss this issue with us. We have Annabel Freeman, who's Manager of Development in Segro. We've Shona Virden from Elliott Wood, engineer. Andrew Mickel, who's Group Director of Mactaggart Mickel, and our own Ian Anderson, from Chief Executive of Iceni Projects. Hi, everybody.
You got my name then, to be honest.
Hardly, Ian. That's one name I will never forget. I think we're safe to say that. So thank you all for joining us today to discuss this. Really great to have you. So to kick off today, what I'd like to talk about is the cycle and the plan from basically for you guys. The one thing you guys all have in common is starting next week, along with kind of about another 10 or so people, you're going to be cycling 700 kilometers from London to Glasgow to raise funds and awareness for the Let's Go Zero campaign and initiative. Ian, I think I might come to you first of all, because I think, as with a lot of these crazy ideas, it's usually starts off with something that you have said. So do you want to explain why, quite frankly, why the heck are you doing this at what, the end of October, early November, cycling to Scotland?
Well, yeah, one of our colleagues said to me earlier, why can't you do it in June? And I was like, well, unfortunately, I couldn't convince the rest of the world to change its climate change conference plans.
You couldn't get on to the Queen and a few of those other people who were attending to see whether they could do it in the summer. We
were somewhat limited by the time of the year, and we were like a challenge though. We don't want to make it too easy. Yeah. We've gone as early as we can. We're going. In terms of we'll be there for the first week, but I don't know. It felt if ever there was an event where it might be appropriate to try and get there under our own steam, it would probably be a climate change conference. That's not me being evangelical. It just seemed that it was a good idea, and I felt the Let's Go Zero link was good as well, in the sense that the idea of giving schools a voice, helping the next generation, dare I say, sort of champion change, also seemed a pretty good a good partnership for us. And the more I've looked into that, the more interested I am in what they're seeking to achieve, both in terms of thinking about how you can get school estates ready for that big shift, as well as giving kids and teachers a voice as well. So looking forward to getting to know those guys a bit more.
Great, good. And Shona, if we come to you in terms of, I guess, your thoughts, why did you agree to do this, and how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, well, the closer it gets, the more I wonder. But yeah, I don't know. I think it was the challenge of cycling to COP26 and also speaking to those young people and teachers and making sure that they hold us, especially in the property industry, accountable for what we're doing. I think it's a really fantastic idea, and also a bit nervous, but we'll get
Good. Speaking of nerves, Andrew, what are you feeling? What are you most excited about and most dreading, shall we say, about the cycle?
I think getting to London, because I can actually walk to the COP26 venue from my house at the moment. So it's the bendy train down to London. And then really we've got some assets in London, and probably just connecting back to north of the border. Also, probably a little bit about the interesting as to the UK government versus maybe Scottish government. I've got slightly different projections and expectations on life a little bit as well. And I've got 14-year-old kids. Shona references the future in terms of the next generation. I think they've just got an expectation that this is all happening. And of course, why would anyone question the sort of climate change expectations. But I think it's maybe for those of us in the middle, it's the transition is the tricky bit. And I think we as practitioners and trying to kind of always probably push the boundaries, maybe the people that push the boundaries are the stormtroopers of the future and possibly lose money on it. So there's a lot of kind of probably learning from each other as well, what's working, what's not working.
Yeah, and are you finding, is the momentum, or is it starting to build? The fact that it's happening now, what, 11 days, in 11 days time or less, is the sense kind of anticipation, do you feel that at the moment?
Is in terms of the feeling from the city, from the sort of chat in the gyms to the chat in the still quite quiet offices, we're still quite COVID aware and pandemic central, probably up here. There's probably a lot of mask wearing that you might be surprised about. There's a lot of the kind of let's call it canvas city being built at the moment around about the venue, and it is the kind of life things of God, it's going to be really difficult to get around the city, and a lot of Glaswegians actually saying they're going to clear off out of the city, clear off to Majorca for 2 weeks and rent their house or their flat out as well. So that's the kind of low level stuff that's going on as well. And I think there's possibly a few insulate protesters as well that might be gluing themselves to some bridges. And there's a little bit of vexatious, probably quite interesting timing on a few strikes that are happening as well. There's a cleansing department strike, and there's a potentially a rail strike as well. So it's cheaper to go and stay in Edinburgh than it is in Glasgow, but you might not be able to get back from Edinburgh to Glasgow. So those are the kind of low level climate change impacts that the Glaswegians are thinking about.
It's interesting. It's going to be kind of a confluence of events, isn't it? As you say, and all the different parties use it to their own, for their own reasons, in order to get kind of, I suppose, maximum exposure. And also the media, you know, how many media outlets, it's the best attention you're going to get, isn't it? Annabel, should we come to you in terms of what's your thoughts, I guess, from a Segro perspective, in terms of the cycle and also the Let's Go Zero initiative? How do you feel about that?
I guess I'm quite lucky that Segro supports me in many cycling endeavours. So there kind of wasn't really a question mark as to whether I'd accept Andrew's and Ian's invitation to do the ride. But when you said it was 700 kilometres, I have just reminded myself that it is 700 kilometres, and that's quite a long way over 6 consecutive days. So although I've done a fair amount of training this year, yeah, I am, like Shona, probably a little bit nervous now that you've said how far we have to cycle. And you know, it's winter, and I've been out over the last couple of days, and it's quite wet and cold. So yeah, I think it will very much be the chat and food getting me through. But I'm really excited on a Segro level. Like professionally, I love seeing what we do from a sustainability point of view with the buildings that we build, but also from a personal perspective. I studied geography, I studied physical geography at university, so I've always had quite a keen interest in climate change, and I've been aware of it and I guess studying it for over 7 years now. So yeah, I'm really excited to see and speak to younger people and how they're feeling about it, and whether they're hopeful or whether they're suffering from climate anxiety. And I think it would be good to get those different perspectives on the way up.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you kind of, my view in it is almost that everyone knows it's a priority now. There was a thing in the Times last month, I'm not sure if anyone's seen that, but it was basically the top priorities for the under 24 cohort and the top priorities for the over 24s. And the number one for the under 24s was, probably not surprisingly, it was mental health. Whereas for the over 24s, it was the NHS. Kind of both health, but actually the different perspectives on it. But number two for both categories was the environment and climate change. So I do think that there is this idea, and as Andrew says, well, it's your kids, are kind of like, it's so obvious, but I now feel even as an industry, it's very topical, and it has been for the last number of years. I guess what we now nearly need to move beyond is talking about it and saying this is a key issue. It's what are we actually doing about it? What's, you know, the kind of action? And from my kind of reading around the media or the preparation for COP26, it feels like that's kind of what's been said, that, you know, Boris is saying it's the turning point for humanity. And it's like, yeah, that's great, that's lovely. But like, what does that actually mean? And even from what I think we've seen from the government in advance, there was yesterday, there was the air source heat pumps and the grant, but there's still, I think the world is still waiting to see exactly what the government are going to produce, because they have to be seen to be leading the way on this. But I guess that's the kind of higher level. What is probably quite interesting is to explore as part of the development industry and what we work in, where do we actually see that action? So we know what needs to be done, but where's the change coming from? Who's leading on that? Andrew, how are you guys approaching this, or where are you currently at?
We primarily are involved in new build construction of residential properties in Scotland, and are involved in strategic land in England. And I think we tend to feel that the new build kind of gets it pretty hard in the neck, because our expectations and delivery of regulation is massively high in terms of insulation. And we have delivered for 2014 for the Commonwealth Games, a zero carbon scheme in Glasgow, 750 units along with others. And there was actually the velodrome subsequently keyed into it, the energy centre, but it did need, I think it was 14 million pounds of government money to pump prime that actual energy centre. And we're doing one similarly with the Buccleuch property south of Edinburgh with 4,000 units, where again, a kind of district heating system. And again, just down in terms of speaking to some of the PLC builders, just how that's going to work in practice, and if things go wrong, what happens, what's the plan B? But the biggest challenge for us is we've got some rental PRS properties that are more historic, just kind of 80-year-old properties, and it's how we retrofit those, and kind of getting to or simply are the end of their shelf life. As well. So there's obviously an expectation in terms of EPC certificates and targets that we're all working to over the kind of medium term. So that's kind of the debate. We think the kind of the new build's pretty much sorted. The technology is catching up, but again, it's down to the things that we all probably talk about in the media. Is the gas ban going to kill your gran type chat that I've heard recently? But there's something like, I think there's 130,000 gas boiler engineers at the moment in the UK, but there's only just over 1,000 air source heat pump engineers. So it's that retraining and reformatting. I think the UK getting it ready is the test as well. And in virtue of the fact that it's sometimes good to look back, to look forward, I've worn my Paris top, and I know that you all think about the Paris Agreement as well in run up to the next 2 weeks. But I mean, I think they still actually, if the UN admit, not really even hit the Paris targets. There's supposed to be a 1.5 degree reduction in global temperatures. But I mean, it is really just a kind of, Leona, as you say, is it just really a talking shop for sort of even cool the hot air, because they haven't even agreed for what we should have done for Paris as well. So we're supposed to be securing global net zero by the mid-century. That's kind of what Paris done. This is a goal for Glasgow. Adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. What does that mean? Mobilize finance. So that's a bit like chuck money from the developed countries to the developing countries, and work together. Those are the actual goals of Glasgow that I kind of looked into. So relatively high level.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. That actually they were saying, so we all know about, you know, what came out of Paris, which is frightening that was 2015. Which is actually hard to believe. It's 6 years ago now. You know, it actually, that time just goes like so quickly. But that actually, yes, they all committed to doing 2 degrees or less, and ideally 1.5 degrees. But actually, they say, or commentators say, that when you add up everyone's commitments, you don't get anywhere close to that. And I think it's exactly that, Andrew, that they're saying what you're meant to do every 5 years, as I understand it, with these COPs, is actually then review your commitments. So that's why they kind of feel that this one is really key, as well as the UK hosting it, but actually that you should really be stepping up again and saying, you know, we can do even better. But first of all, you've got to actually do what you previously said you'd do, and how you're going about doing that. And I think that's why you have to kind of empathize with the likes of Greta and that. We were saying, well, come on, guys, yeah, it's all well and good, but show me it. Shona, you're probably, from an engineering perspective, this is really at the fore in terms of what Andrew was talking about. That technology is, you know, we can want to do it, but have we got the people and that side of things? What's your experiences like so far in it?
Yeah, I think the main thing from definitely a structural engineering perspective is it has to be driven by legislation. You know, there's quite a number of, you know, smaller local governments and private landowners that are pushing for personal goals, but actually until you enforce that, pushing for those goals, you're not going to make the changes, and we're not even, you know, meeting our targets, let alone Paris targets, unless you start to enforce it for everybody. I think in terms of trying to lead the change, we're trying to do it at Elliott Wood is we're such a small company in compared to, you know, the grand scheme of things. And actually, we've all got these great ideas. And I think traditionally engineers are very, very, find it very difficult to collaborate because, you know, it's all about competition. But actually, I think that time for that's passed now. It's about sharing knowledge, sharing resources, and just working together. I think that not only works in the industry, but at COP26, it's about countries learning from each other. And instead of shifting blame and saying, we're doing these great things, why aren't you doing it? It's saying, we're doing these great things. I can see you're doing those great things. Let's work together because, you know, at the end of the day, it's one world, isn't it? It's not different islands.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I think there's always been a view that it's personal responsibility, whereas you say, and it aligns to Andrew's point, which was the last objective was working together. And it sounds very simple, but actually it would bring a lot of great good if it actually happened in reality.
Yes.
Annabel, I suppose from Segro's perspective and your perspective, you guys are doing lots of great things, and this from the industrial side as opposed to residential, or maybe in time it will be the residential too.
Yeah, we at the beginning of the year we launched our Responsible Segro framework, which one element of that obviously covers our environmental goals, and this was because we had already reached our Segro 2025 goals, so we were kind of really far ahead in that respect. And without delving into too much detail, it's things like recycling minimum of 95% of what's already on site when we come to develop. Everything's kind of, well, I guess especially in London, everything's it adheres to the London plan, but we try and go above and beyond that. So as I was saying earlier, we're on site at Segro Park Tottenham, and that's supposed to be or is going to be a carbon negative industrial scheme. And, you know, as standard, we put PVs on all of our buildings, but we're trying to look at that's new developments, right? So it's as Andrew was saying, it's easier to do great things with new developments, but for the assets that we already own, the legacy ones, what can we do better there? And we have lots of internal projects where we're trying to retrofit these kind of older 70s, 80s units to, one, bring the EPCs up, because that's going to become a problem down the line anyway. But also because our customers are now demanding that they want green buildings, and they don't necessarily want to move to a new shiny building, or they really love the location, but they do want to have some kind of circular renewable energy system, and they want EV charging, and they want batteries for the PVs on the roofs, and they want bees outside. So, you know, lots of our estates now have bees, and we give out Segro honey every so often. So that, you know, there's lots going on from a Segro perspective. There's still a long way to go, of course. but I'd like to think that we are leading the way when it comes to industrial development and developing that responsibly.
Great, yeah, and it's that point of demand, isn't it? Both kind of from the top, from investors now demanding it, as well as clients 100%. And occupiers are looking for it, and that's actually quite a good thing. And they'll both come together to get the right outcomes. Yeah. Ian, I'll come to you in terms of, I suppose, the overall, having that consultancy perspective on things, and where you're seeing things are going with clients, and what's your thoughts on all of this?
I guess we're a mouthpiece for our clients who've already got ideas, and we're also there to hopefully advise and lead our clients on where they can improve let's be honest, often it's about improving the planning prospects of development and trying to identify ways in which you can sell the virtues of a proposal. That's not meant to be disingenuous, it's just reality. We're obviously working in an industry where we require planning consent before typically we can build stuff. I'm interested to know when a climate emergency is a very special circumstance for going forward with a planning application. All these local authorities keep saying climate emergency, woeful progress on local plans, dire needs for development. At what point is that a very special circumstance? So that'd be one high level. But I think equally, I was fascinated by the government's announcement yesterday, and already the reaction you're getting to people, because Andrew's touched on it, Annabel's touched on it. Actually, greening the existing estate is arguably the most important thing we need to be doing, because, as Shona said, legislation catches new development, and already, you've got people going, oh, it's quite expensive, isn't it? An air source heat pump, oh, it's a bit ugly, isn't it? Oh, I will have to change my radiators. So on one level, we want government to do things, we want big business to do things. But to a certain extent, we have to take on that responsibility ourselves as individuals. And I'll be fascinated whether it's on the bike ride or whether we're up in Glasgow, how many people, when we've sort of put down a glass of warm white wine and we've all discussed we need to change the world, are actually prepared to start doing it themselves. And that's actually one of the things. I've had that conversation around the sort of kitchen table this morning. Well, if it costs 15 grand to put a heat pump in, and we get a £5,000 subsidy, are we willing to do it? Oh, they're a bit ugly, aren't they? Well, do we have to do it yet? Could we wait 5 years? Well, so, I think it's fascinating. And I wonder, to a certain extent, I know the government will get pilloried for the fact that a £5,000 grant is not enough. But is it as much a psychological point, a symbolic point, to get people talking at dinner parties and around coffee tables and saying, are you willing to make those changes personally?
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, I'm conscious of time. So one of the last things I was going to ask actually is that idea. And I think, Ian, we've got an event. Iceni you're doing an event, one of our events at COP, and it is actually asking people to pledge.
And it's with Shona. It's with Elliott Wood as well. Yeah. Yes,
exactly. So it's this back to this point of, it's great, we're all talking about, we know what we need to do, but actually let's start pledging it. So maybe in drawing ourselves to a close, if we go around the group and we all say, whether that's from a personal perspective or as a company, what we would think we would pledge to do, or what we would be interested in committing to. Who any volunteers who would like to go first? Shona,
can I wait for the others to say it so we can then just borrow what they've said and pretend we were going to say that all along?
It's maybe like, is it kind of some of it is the fear, though, I think, as you say, and if appreciate the Londoners don't need cars, but how many of us of this call got electric cars? I'm still a bit scared to move because I do a few miles and I'm scared of the thing running out in rural parts of Scotland. But my next car, I'll probably get one, will be electric. I have got an air source heat pump already. It's in a retrofit in an older house. It is noisy. I'm onto a third engineer. So not quite embracing the, and then we might have just been easier going hydrogen. So, let's all, we should all meet up again in 5 years and say what worked.
That's the thing, if you're going to lead on it, yeah, there's the risks. Or I think they were highlighting last night on the news about, yeah, there's a lot of, we're talking about a lot of electric charging points, but actually people don't know where to access them. So if you were to come to London, where would you plug in your car? How much are you paying? All of that type of stuff. It just takes time to catch up. Annabelle, so obviously you're doing pretty good in terms of cycling everywhere, it would seem.
Yeah.
Can you do more? Will you do more? What's your thoughts?
I probably will have to do more, and I guess it's a retrospective pledge, but I actually sold my car last month because I, one, live in zone 2 of London. I don't need a car. And all of my colleagues expected me to cycle to like the Heathrow Cargo Centre or like Belvedere or Enfield anyway. So I was like, why do I have a car? And, you know, for environmental reasons, it's ludicrous. I don't like cycling in London and I grumble at the cars anyway. So I was like, well, I can't keep being a hypocrite like this. So I got rid of my car. But maybe my pledge is probably not to do with the built environment or cycling. It's probably to do with fashion and not buying new clothes, because the fashion industry is quite polluting. So maybe I'll try and do 6 months, nine months buying any new clothes. I'm going to regret that when I need new lycra, but maybe that's the pledge.
Brilliant. I love that one. And yeah, really massively agree. And just this idea of fast fashion that we've become way too used to, I think. And just whatever's the latest. And yeah, the impacts of that are pretty horrific. Shona, have you anything you would add?
Yeah, I think I set myself a pledge a couple of years ago, actually. I said, okay, I'm not going to get on a flight. And it was really easy because then lockdown hit. So now actually the challenge has really started because, you know, there's so many adventures and actually, do you really need to go on them? Actually, there's so many local adventures you can have at home. And like Annabelle, I don't own a car and would like to put that off for as long as possible and actually see if I can survive without one. It's very easy again, because I live in London and the train network for me is very handy. But the bike definitely does help to get to the harder to reach areas. But yeah, we'll see how long the not getting a flight lasts.
Good, yeah, especially when the weather turns and when we start doing a bit more global travel. But yeah, I think that's a great one. Ian, have you anything? Are you currently purchasing an air source heat pump?
I'm good. I am going to look into it, definitely. I mean, it's because what I probably don't know yet, and I'll probably pick Shona's brains on this on the cycle, is just what I would need. You know, it's all well and good buying an air source heat pump, but what would I then need to do to change the whole configuration of the house? And is there a clever consultant that can come around and give me a proper how-to guide on what I would need to do? So I will definitely look into that. I've got a hybrid, but I'd like to change to a full electric. But equally, I mean, probably as much to do with the pandemic as environmental ideology. I have definitely converted to cycling wherever I possibly can. And in whatever vehicle I have, I'd quite like to minimise its use. And I've managed to encourage the rest of my family to become cyclists first. So I need to kind of keep some of those initiatives going as it's becoming easier to become lazier, I suppose, as we've come out of coming out of some of the restrictions of the pandemic.
Yeah, and not just restricting back to our old ways or returning to that, kind of keeping some of the good that's arisen from these changes. Brilliant. Well, I think that probably brings us to a close, but thank you all so much for your contributions. I believe that those of us who will be in the safety and warmth of our own homes, will be able to track you guys as you cycle online via the various social media channels and Iceni Project's website. And I hope the cycle goes really well for you guys. And yeah, it's a great initiative. Anyone can also support that online too. There's full details on Iceni Projects. And yeah, have a good day. Thank you all.